Well, hello everybody, and a very warm online welcome to Cardiff Women's Aid. I'm Debra Perkin, the Vice Chair of this charity, which delivers protection, refuge and recovery services to women and to their children across Cardiff who face domestic abuse. We also provide services to help women recognise when they might be getting into an abusive relationship, and we campaign for greater recognition of this seemingly unending global pandemic of violence against women. Along with my colleagues, I'm delighted to host these hustings with the candidates, or some of them, for South Wales Police and Crime Commissioner. In just over a week, on Thursday the 6th of May, voters will decide on the person they wish to entrust with this important role. Today, we have the opportunity to ask questions of some of the candidates on all matters of crime and policing and how to make South Wales a safer place to live. Of course, here at Cardiff Women's Aid, we're particularly interested in their views on tackling violence against women and girls, domestic abuse and sexual violence. Now, we're recording the event and we'll make the recording available at a later point via our YouTube channel, which we'll publicise via our social media. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the candidates in alphabetical order by surname and ask each of them to give us a 2-minute opening statement. Now, we have 3 of 6 candidates with us, and in alphabetical order, I'm actually going to say Fychan first. She's not, in fact, a candidate for Plaid Cymru, but she's standing in for her colleague, Nadine Marshall, and is here to represent the party's views. So, Heledd, would you like to give us your opening statement?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the welcome. I think it's really important that we're having these hustings, and also I'd like to say thank you for all the work that you have been doing, obviously over the past year in particular, seeing the stats in terms of users and the impact it's had. Thank God that you're there to support people. So thank you for all that you're doing. And I agree with your manifesto commitment in terms of recentering violence against women as a priority. It has to be for any government, and we need cross-party government working on this. Nadine Marshall is going to be a very different police and crime commissioner if she's elected. She has come into politics and standing for this position through tragic personal circumstances following the murder of her son. And she has been unrelenting in terms of her work in reforming the National Probation Service, but very much believes in partnership working for core police issues and thinking very differently in terms of how we approach policing and work in partnership with organisations such as yourselves. In terms of Plaid Cymru, we will continue to press for the full devolution of justice matters to Wales. Obviously, lots of the transformational change that we'd all like to see at present, the levers are in Westminster, but it doesn't mean that we can't have meaningful interventions here in Wales. And I look forward to having a discussion around those with you today. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much indeed, Heledd. And next, I'd like to ask Gail John from Propel to give her opening statement.
Thank you. I think you've just put me off mute. Right, that's brilliant. Yes, my name is Gail John, and I've worked and lived in Swansea all my life. Like Nadine, I'm coming into this position not through personal gain, but through the experience of working with a lot of women and children who've been victims of domestic violence and abuse. I'm very fortunate being that I am a teacher. So I teach children from primary age up until postgrad, and 2 of my students are postgraduate students in Goldsmiths University, and they're studying domestic violence and sexual abuse. So this is an issue that is very, very close to my heart. I've seen the statistics. It is a world crisis right across the world, where you've got women are victims of coercive behaviour. And to be honest with you, there is so much that needs to be done to challenge the current culture, because it is a cultural problem that exists where, and it's right across, it affects jobs, it affects the attitudes right across the board. And it really also as well with the national, the NHS, if you look at the domestic violence statistics, it affects our, you know, in terms of autoimmune disease, it affects the children that if they've actually witnessed domestic violence, there is a tendency of them being victimised, sexual abuse victims later on in life, because unfortunately their experiences cannot be normalised. You know, so we need to be challenging the thought processes, because a lot of these women who end up in domestic violence relationships don't even know that they're in these situations, and they need help and they need training and they need support to get out of it. And so also if you look at the criminal justice system, where we have women, I know there's research, they've asked women about the reasons, and a lot of them are domestic violence victims or are victims of sexual assault. When you look at the policing as well, a lot of people that I've spoken to, this attitude, sorry, okay, thank you. My time.
You got a bit over. Okay, thanks very much. And now I'd like to come to Alun Michael for the Labour and Co-Operative Party.
Thank you very much. I didn't just make domestic violence and abuse a top priority for tackling when I first took up the role, but I've acted on it consistently and incrementally year on year since then, with Cardiff Women's Aid and similar organisations across South Wales being vital partners in that work. Two separate elements as I see it. The first is supporting victims and survivors, and I built up a strong team, developed a clear strategy jointly with the Chief Constable, and particularly invested in supporting voluntary sector partners during the COVID year. The second is tackling perpetrators, because many perpetrators of domestic violence and abuse are serial perpetrators. We're simply going to see more victims in future unless we stop the cycle of violence and abuse. And two examples of actions that I've taken. One was investing in the IRIS programme, first police force to invest across the whole of South Wales in training the staff of GP surgeries to identify victims of abuse, which has increased by about 500 the number of individuals identified as needing support in each health board area. And the other is Drive, tackling perpetrators, which when the initial money for the pilot ran out, rather than let it stop, I not only maintained the pilots in Merthyr and Cardiff, but extended Drive across the whole of the South Wales Police area, all 7 local authorities. And during the COVID year, we put that in place in each of the 7 local authorities. I think I take as an accolade that when Yvette Cooper, now chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, visited and spent time with a couple of our PCSOs, she said to me afterwards, I've been with PCSOs in every part of the country across the 43 police forces. Yours are the first 2 that mentioned supporting the victims of domestic violence and abuse as being a part of their job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's splendid. Now, I just want to check that we haven't been joined by our candidate from the Independent Party, whom we were expecting. Let's check with you, Alex.
I don't believe so, unless they've
here with us.
got a different name.
Okay, well, it appears he wasn't able to come. And I also, we had apologies from Callum Littlemore from the Liberal Democrats. And we did invite the Conservative candidate, Steve Gallagher, but we didn't have a response to our invitation. So, turning to our audience, you're very welcome to ask questions through the chat function on Zoom, which will be added to the questions that we've been collecting in advance. And our team is away behind the scenes to sift through them. What we want to do is ensure that we reflect the most pressing topics that you, the group. When we come to your question, could you please introduce yourself before asking your question? It's good to know who's here. But if you would prefer to remain anonymous, then of course I'm happy to ask the question for you. Now, our first question is from Cicely Vogue. Are you with us, Cicely?
My question is, how will your party effectively hold perpetrators of violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence to account?
Thank you. Okay, well, let me start with Gail this time.
Thank you, Cicely, for your question. And it is a very good question, because we do need to tackle this worldwide problem, which, as we know, will not actually stop unless perpetrators are held to account. So when there is the difficulty that we do have, though, as I'm sure you're all experts here, is that women will very rarely disclose the sexual and the domestic violence abuse. So in order to hold perpetrators to account, there needs to be a lot of training, and also I think it would start really in training in the schools as well, so that women are recognising abuse, because perpetrators will not be able to be held to account if women are not actually disclosing their abuse to the police, because a lot of them will not come forward. So when abuse is actually then disclosed, there does need to be statements taken. But then again, because when you have coercive control, to understand the underworkings, women are in fear. A lot of women are in fear of the authorities. They're in fear of, because a lot of the police are male, and they're afraid of the repercussions. So I think, you know, Cicely, your question is very, very important, because it is very difficult for these perpetrators to be held account unless we get the women to train them, to have the confidence to come forward, to bring disclosures that then can sort of hold the perpetrators to account. So, you know, that
10
would
seconds
be...
left, Gail.
Okay.
10 seconds is fine.
Oh, okay. I've got 10 seconds. All right, sorry. So yes, I mean, for me, the easy bit is actually holding them to account, because once you get the women to disclose, then yes, it goes into the hands of the police, and then it is actually, but, you know,
Okay.
yeah, so that's what I think.
Okay, splendid. Thanks very much indeed. And now I'd like to go to Alun Michael. How will your party effectively hold perpetrators of violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence to account?
Well, I won't give a general party response. I'll just say what we're actually doing. First is the police understanding of domestic violence and abuse, and for instance, understanding what coercive control is all about. Because unless you have that understanding, then the first police response when there's a report is not going to be right. So training and the motivation and the understanding of police leadership, and that's an expectation I have on the Chief Constable to deliver. And the second thing is, I mentioned in my introduction, the DRIVE project. We were one of the first forces to have a pilot project of DRIVE, which is tackling the perpetrators of domestic violence and abuse. It was proved in the pilot period to have reduced violence and incidents in Merthyr and RCT, and also in Cardiff. So when the money ran out last March, I said, I can't let this go. So that has been paid for since then out of police funds, but I've also put additional investment so that all of the 5 other local authorities now are also covered right across the area. And then thirdly, it's the partnership with voluntary organisations, in particular Women's Aid and other partners, to be innovative all the time in the way that we approach these issues. Well
within time, thank you. Right, Heledd.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Obviously, Plaid Cymru would like to see justice devolved. We would still be pressing for the criminal justice to be devolved so that we can create a fairer and more equal justice system. We were extremely frustrated to see yesterday with the domestic abuse bill that the perpetrator register was rejected as an amendment, and it's something that we've long campaigned for. And also in terms of strengthening Clare's law, we don't think the law goes far enough as it is, and we will continue to campaign for a register of those convicted of domestic violence, whereby anyone found guilty of domestic violence would be required to give the police their name and details and so on. With persistent offenders as well, we would like to see that those sentenced to 30 months or more for domestic violence or coercive control, that they remain on the register indefinitely. We support victims' code of practice and also make it easy in terms of reporting sexual violence by ensuring that every survivor is offered support of an independent sexual violence advisor. So it's very much emphasis on supporting far more, but also in terms of perpetrators, making it much more identifiable and strengthening, as I said, Clare's law.
Thank you very much. Now, Mike Baker, have you been able to connect with us? The candidate from...
Can you hear me?
I can now, yes, but I can't see you, unfortunately.
Oh, my video shows as being on.
Mm-hmm. Well, not for us.
All right, can we go blind?
I think we'll have to, yes. Okay, so Mike, I think you might like to answer this question, and then I will ask you to do your 2-minute opening statement, since you didn't arrive in time and have the opportunity to do that. Okay. Okay.
I've just managed to get my techie other than video working. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, of course. Why not hear the questioner ask it again?
Yes, please.
Would you like to ask it again?
How will your party effectively hold perpetrators of violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence to account?
Okay. Firstly, I'm not a party member. My first response to it is we really must start believing properly what's being told to us as police officers. Now, I was a member of the Vice Squad when I was a police officer, and it became reasonably obvious that there was a little, I don't fully believe you, if you will, attitude by some officers. We must change that perception. I think it is changing. We must have confidence in what the person is telling us so that we can action it correctly. We can't do this on our own. The police are not the sole persons with responsibility to deal with this. It's a multi-agency thing. We all know that. I think also, I mentioned there about the belief issue. We need to train certainly all our frontline troops about how we deal with these things. That is vitally important. If we don't have police officers fully believing in what they're doing, then perhaps we're not going to get the results we want. The other major
just over 10 seconds to go, Mike. I didn't.
Oh, right. Okay. We need to get people confident. Okay. We need to get people confident in what they're doing with the police. Let the victims feel that we're looking after them. Okay,
splendid. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, your opening statement, Mike, as an independent, you have 2 minutes now to lay out your position.
All right. Firstly, I'm a former police officer. I spent 30 years with South Wales Police. Various departments, and as I've mentioned earlier with the Vice Squad, dealing with a wide variety of sex-related offences. When I left, I became a barrister. I am currently, although I will be putting this down if I'm successful, I'm the managing director of a small company. I firmly believe that we must address all forms of crime. When I made a statement at the last election, I warned that the recording of crime was not correct. That was addressed, and thereafter there was I believe a 280% or 250% increase in recorded crime of this type. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I have experience of sexual offence investigation. I know how it works as far as policing is concerned, and I need the opportunity to make sure that that is going to happen properly, that the perception of the public needs to be changed. They need to know that they can have confidence in the police service. As far as I'm concerned, I will work tooth and nail to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Splendid. Okay, well, now we're going to return to our audience, to more questions. And I think we now have a question from Leila Helvachi. Leila.
Thank you, Deborah. So, women and children often have negative experiences going through the family courts, with a lack of support and guidance through this process. What will you and your party do to put the children first in these processes?
So, this time let us go for Alan Michael first.
Thanks very much. It's a very difficult question, actually, because the family courts are very often dealing with the same individuals and victims who end up with the experience in the criminal courts. But of course, the Police and Crime Commissioner doesn't have any standing or any say over the work of the courts in general, but particularly the family courts. It doesn't come into our ambit. Personally, I've always argued that more resource ought to go into the family court system in order to focus on the needs of those who are victims, even though that's not the way that the language is used when you look at the family court arrangements. Very often people end up in the family courts, particularly if it's a question of the care of children as a result of domestic violence and abuse and things that are relevant within the criminal system. But it's actually quite a difficult one to get your hands around. I would agree with you from the experiences I've had over the years that it's a very unsatisfactory, very often a very slow, very often a very unsympathetic place for those who are going through traumatic experiences. And I agree that it needs reform. But actually, the Police and Crime Commissioner is not able to do a great deal, except to speak to political colleagues about the need for that reform and what you see in the day job, as it were.
Okay, thank you very much. Gail John. She's muted again. Can we unmute?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that question. This is an issue that is very, very close to my heart because I advocate for a lot of people who are fighting against the, well, really, you know, they're victims of domestic violence, and then what I find is that the domestic violence, they're victims and they're re-victimized by the system, and the domestic violence is used against them very often as a tool to remove their children, and then the perpetrator is given access to the children where the female has then had their children removed. So I do believe that the system that is set up against women, this is my personal opinion, needs to complete reform. So, you know, refuges, we need, in order, because women, let's be honest with you, if the abuser is present, they're not good, they're going to be in a state of fear, they're not going to be able to disclose, and these are things that some of the professionals need to be aware of, the power of coercive control, which is keeping women trapped, you know, where our statistics, the work that we've had with the feminist researchers for years, there doesn't seem to be a shift towards the statistics are still, you know, highlighting that women are, anyway, sorry. Thank you.
Do you want to finish your sentence, Kate?
Yeah, you know, that, yeah, we need to basically completely change the system. That's, you know, and within the family courts as well, and we need your voices.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, splendid. Heledd Fychan.
Thank you. We can all agree the system isn't working as it is, and agree that there needs to be reform. We, on a practical basis, would like to allocate funding for support services and safe places for women and their children who need to leave their homes, and to support them in gathering the support to be able to do so. Also, Plaid Cymru will commission victim support services that offer both emotional and practical help to victims of domestic abuse, to help them cope and recover from their experiences, but also to support them in achieving the best possible outcome through the criminal justice system. So it is very much looking at the Scottish model as well, where it's a whole system policy-based approach. Again, this is why what we are campaigning on the devolution of the judicial system as well. But in the meantime, we need to be able to invest in this way. And I think commissioning the support services would be an important first step.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, Mike Baker.
Thank you. Firstly, I have experience of the family courts, practicing as a lawyer, and I agree it's a very difficult place for youngsters to be. There are several things that I think could be addressed, and at this point I'm going to reflect on what Alan Michael said. I do agree with him. The family court is not under the responsibility of the Police and Crime Commissioner, but could have an influence on the way the courts are actually run. We don't put money into things like that. The Commissioner is not responsible for it. But there are several things. For example, how the family is treated in the court, the use of terminology in the court, things like that. It is the case, and again, I'm going to agree with Alun. We have cases that go to the family court where the perpetrator, and we will call him a perpetrator, he ends up sometimes in the criminal court. So then it becomes a criminal event, and the Commissioner has now a little bit of influence over it. As I say, I've been to the family courts. They're not a nice place to be for any of those family members, and it needs to be addressed. It needs to have an attitude towards the family. 5 minutes? I can see you, but you can't see me. The family need to feel at ease when they go into the courts, and I'm concerned about it, haven't seen it.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all very much. Now we have a third question from Natalie W. I'm not being mysterious, but that's the name I've given. Natalie, where are you?
Oh, yeah, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Debra. With regards to coming forward and disclosing to the police, with regards to my own personal experience, as Mike, I think it was Michael Baker quite rightly said, things need to improve on the ground. If you were elected, what will you do to make steps forward to make the disclosure better with regards to the way that police respond, the lack of, so they don't victim shame, they don't blame the victims, the responsibility is put with the perpetrator, and police respond in a respectful manner and take the allegations seriously and not victim shame the already hurt victim.
Okay, well, we'll come to Mike Baker first this time.
Sorry, were you starting with me? Apologise.
Yes, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. No, it's a good question. I understand where she's coming from in this respect, and I'm going to put myself back into the position of a lawyer in the family court. and as a policeman, forgive me, let's shut that off. And as a policeman investigating these things, the one thing that was patently obvious is confidence. And I'll refer to them at the moment as victims. They feel that the police don't have the right attitude towards these things. And I think that's a dreadful position for the victim to be in, because they now have not only the event that's occurred, but the lack of support from the police service. I don't like that. I mean, I did try when I was a policeman to put people at ease, but I was a lone voice in a large room. So as Commissioner, I will certainly be looking to training for police officers, firstly to believe as much as they possibly can about the victim's experience, but be aware also that not all claims are true, and we must be able to filter out those issues that are erroneous, but definitely to introduce a better training scheme for police officers to deal in a more friendly way, if you will, and not in an official way with the victims.
5 seconds. You're done.
I think I'll finish there. I can't get another sentence in 5 minutes.
Okay, splendid. Thank you very much. Fychan.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it is that zero tolerance approach, and I agree it is about raising awareness of these issues. Obviously, from Welsh Women's Aid manifesto, in terms of recentering violence against women as a priority, and I would hope post-COVID that actually that we have this conversation about the realities of the situation, the facts that have come out, and the fact that we're having far more national conversations now about domestic violence and so on, and specifically questioning the rates in terms of convictions of reported crimes and the underreporting that persists. So therefore, in terms of, I mentioned earlier, the need to strengthen Clare's law, well, along with that, with the register would be, of course, the training of officers to understand that. And I think until we have that register, what we're hearing time and time again from victims are the fact that perpetrators aren't known, that it's new police officers dealing with each reporting crime. And I think we need that register in place so that accountability is there, and they need to be reporting to police on specific occasions. So officers will be making unannounced visits and so on, but until we have that transparency of system as well as training, I fear that we're not going to be able to tackle the root cause of the problem and give women and victims the support they require.
Thank you very much. And now Gail John.
Thank you. An excellent question again. I do believe that we need to have a trauma-informed response. That is really Propel's policy, really right across the board, to a trauma-informed nation. And with women, in terms of communication, I believe that with trauma, it does affect the language area in the brain. So there does need to be training for police and for the women as well themselves. So there should really, there should be a range of methods for women to disclose, including digital tools, because often face-to-face can be very intimidating. So I think we should really extend the methods of reporting and communication so that women don't feel that they're going to not be believed, because there is a culture. I mean, being a woman myself and had experience of trying to, disclosing about males, and I've been in a number of occasions myself where my complaint has been silenced by men, and I've been told, or you didn't mean to say that, let me take the words out of your mouth. So, this needs to stop and I think really because women have had such bad experiences of disclosing, then there needs to be other methods that allow women to express themselves, whether it's through written form, whether it's through bringing a friend. And I do disagree as well. Someone said about, that people make things up. Well, okay, we need evidence. You can't just think or have a mindset that people are making it up. We, yeah.
Gail, sorry, that's
okay. Thank you.
90 seconds. That's your 90 seconds.
Thank you.
Okay, and finally, Alan Michael.
It's very limiting this time. There are three things. One is the training of police officers. The second is the development of a whole culture in policing, so that they're people who understand domestic violence and abuse and have immediate sympathy for the person who's making a report. We do have a problem in the proportion of relatively new officers, but wherever possible, the officers responding to a report of domestic violence and abuse should be specifically trained and experienced officers so that they know what they're dealing with. And we do try to achieve that. And they should use the information on niche that demonstrates if there are previous reports. But the other thing is making it easier to report. I mentioned earlier the IRIS programme. By training the staff of GP surgeries to sympathetically speak to people who come into the surgery, we took from single figures to over 500 the number of people disclosing domestic violence and abuse. Therefore, women who could be supported in their experience. And the final thing, which I think is really important, is that Wales is leading the way because the 4 Welsh forces have trained all our staff on the trauma-informed approach through early action together to understand what those experiences are that lead to problems and behaviour later on. As I say, the question is one on which I'd like to have 90 minutes, not 90 seconds, but I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. We're trying to get a broad range of issues and questions, but
yeah,
it's a bit like having to come up with a 90-second soundbite each time. Not entirely satisfactory, but we're enjoying it. Okay, now question 4 is Chelsea. Where are you, Chelsea?
Hi, thank you. My question is, how do you think your party can increase the rape conviction statistics within Wales, as they are extremely low, the level of rape offences committed?
Right, conviction rates for rape. Okay, can we start with Heledd Fychan, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chelsea, for your question. Well, a key thing we want to do is make the reporting of sexual abuse as straightforward as possible, ensuring that all incidents of sexual abuse, including rape, are investigated. And as I mentioned earlier, offering an independent sexual violence advisor as a supporter, but also as an advocate to each high-risk survivor. We also want to ensure that sexual assault referral centres are properly funded with adequate training for the professionals who work there.
Okay, thank you very much. And next, may we hear from Gail John, please?
Thank you very much for your question. Very, very important question. I did research myself from 2012 across the South Wales region, and it was educational research, believe it or not. I was looking at educational barriers to achievement, and sexual abuse and rape came up as one of the themes, which you wouldn't think when you're actually asking about education exclusion, but it did, it came up. And I think really what we need to sort of acknowledge is that some women are being raped sort of digitally or sort of in other ways. They don't actually realise that they are being raped until later, just like the grooming, just like grooming gangs with the boyfriend who, you know, they believe that they've got a boyfriend and they're doing things for their boyfriend, but also as well, Rotherham, that this has brought up the issue of women child prostitutes. There's no such thing as child prostitutes, it's abuse. So, you know, we need really to be challenging the current mindset. I mean, I've done some research on peer-on-peer research as well, where there's been peer-on-peer abuse, and you know, this is again where women, there's this women shaming throughout the teenage years, from you know, when they're born. You know, we need a change in our culture where women are respected, that women, you know, are, and also men, the way that men and young boys are treating women, you know, not shaming them. Sorry.
Great. Please don't be sorry. Splendid. Okay. Thank you very much. And Alun Michael next.
Thank you, Chelsea. The conviction statistics are appalling, and it's not much consolation that the South Wales figures are better than most other forces. So I brought together the Chief Crown Prosecutor for Wales and a Deputy Chief Constable, woman Deputy Chief Constable, to ask the question, can we do things differently in Wales? Let's not wait for national initiatives that might take years to come about. And we have a working group that is working through how we could improve the situation in Wales. Secondly, I helped to create criminal justice in Wales that brings together all the criminal justice agencies in Wales, which has accelerated its work during the pandemic, where the closure of courts was a real challenge. And we've now created a victims strand of activity chaired by a chief constable with a programme of work to look at the impact on victims of not just policing, but the whole of the criminal justice system. And I'm convinced that this will bring about improvements in the coming months and years.
You've got another 20 seconds if you'd like it.
Well, the thing is that it's worth saying that I'm in favour of the devolution of policing and criminal justice to Wales, but I'm not prepared to wait for that if it'll take years with the current government not being interested. So what we're doing is getting the non-devolved bodies that work in Wales to work together. During the COVID period, it was commented by everybody that we got the courts back open in Wales, and we did more to create the opportunity of remote evidence giving in Wales than any of the regions of England. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, I'd like to come to Mike Baker.
The conviction rate for all sexual offences, not good at all. One of the main factors of that is the presentation of the case in the courts. If the case is not strong, then the conviction is not going to be strong. There are several reasons for that. We've already touched on some of it, and that's training for police officers. But sometimes you need to have other agencies for advice during that investigation. Now, from experience, I can say that I've sought advice when I was the officer in charge of the Vice Squad from the Crown Prosecution Service regarding the quality of the evidence, both pre and following charge. Now, it's vitally important, and although I won't give you detail, when I was in the Vice Squad, I dealt with what was then known as the most serious child abuse case in the country. And there were dozens of children who'd been raped. Now, I liaised closely with the CPS on how best to present that case to the court. And the net result was, with that cooperation between agencies, the man was convicted on all counts. And we, the police at the time, were given commendations by the judge for the quality of the evidence. Now, that's important. We need to put the evidence properly together. And the only way to do that is to speak carefully and quietly with the victims.
Splendid. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Right, whizzing through. The next question is from Camilla Hawthorne. You there with us, Camilla? Yeah. Hello, please put your...
Lovely. Thank you. So this is my question. How do we change the way we bring up our children, boys and girls, so that they learn to respect women and not try to control or dominate them? And what is there in each of your manifestos that will start this change?
Thank you. I'll start with Gail John.
Right, thank you very much for your question. I do believe, as I've said before, that it needs to be a culture change right across the board, and it starts in our schools where we look at prevention. So we need to really be looking at what, you know, where there's an acceptable change of mindset where, you know, boys don't have to be, you know, the ones who are, you know, as in, you know, don't, where, you have, girls in the kitchen. So, you have this play area within the nursery where the girls then, go and wear sort of pink, and they're sort of with the sort of just going in, and we need to really ensure, if you look at within primary school as well, that there's not many male teachers. So I think we need really to be just looking at the genders. Everyone needs to be taken a part really in challenging the culture that we that is actually encouraging domestic violence towards women. And I'm just looking at respect towards women. As I sort of said before, there's a lot of, with the peer-on-peer abuse, you will have males, this idea where, how many women can they sleep with? That seems to be a current, whereas before the young boys would collect football cards, now it's how many women can they sleep with? And then there's the shaming towards women.
Right.
So this needs to be addressed at school level.
Thank you, Gail. We'll have to hold it there. Can we come next to Alan Michael?
The Police and Crime Commissioner doesn't have a great deal of control over this area, but we can work with other education, with other agencies. And one of the most important things that I put a lot of time and energy in is the police schools programme, which has moved from just looking at informing children about drugs to taking a whole culture approach, a whole school approach, and working with schools on understanding respect for each other, avoiding bullying and things like that. I also think it's about both formal education and informal education, and I welcome the Welsh Labour commitment to restoring the youth service, which I think has been a terrible loss because of the funding that's been taken out there over a number of years. And I say that as somebody who worked in some quite deprived communities as a youth worker for many years before I was an MP. It does have to be the whole of society that changes. Education has a big part to play, but what we can do as a Police and Crime Commissioner and within the police is to help to build that culture, and that's why our programme on understanding adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs evidence that was produced by Public Health Wales, and building that understanding of the impact of trauma into the training of every police officer is not irrelevant to this question.
Excellent, thank you. And Mike Baker.
Again, I agree with what some of what Alan Michael has just said, some of it. It is a multi-agency thing, and it's not the responsibility per se of the Commissioner, but the police do have an input in schools, youth activity, multi-agency approaches. Now, not to take the lead, but to have an influence on those areas. Now, schools liaison, I think, is important, so that the police officers are well trained to recognise when they're in the school that maybe there's some issues there with the children. And I've been speaking with a lot of youth groups who've contacted me with a view to asking my help in relation to all sorts of things. And I do believe, as Alun rightly said, there's education required here, but that's not specifically the police educating people, but the education department, the schools, these other multi-agencies, they should all get together. The police input could be with the youth activity, and as I say, schools liaison. These things are difficult to deal with. The recognition of the problem by officers and schools and teachers and what have you is a major problem, and that needs to be looked at. Nothing more for 5 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Mike. And final answer on our final question is Heledd, please.
Thank you. you are specifically what's in our manifesto and in the Plaid Cymru manifesto. We endorse the role of the new curriculum in fostering greater understanding of healthy relationships and also in tackling gender stereotypes. We feel very strongly that this should be things that are discussed from an early age and throughout your education, that healthy relationships must be part of it. Also things like, it's that understanding, you know, it used to be when I was in school, there used to be women being taught about periods and things like that, and some of the women issues, and you may have some reference in terms of what an abusive relationship may be, but not having those conversations with men there either. And I think we need to have those conversations with both genders there, and also to tackle that gender stereotyping, something I'm very conscious of as a mother of a 7-year-old boy as well. I don't think there is too early an age to be having those difficult conversations about you know, what women experience that is different, and his responsibility at that age. But not everybody has those conversations at home, so the role of education is absolutely central here. And at the moment it is potluck in terms of who your teacher is, and we need to strengthen this so that those conversations are happening in every school in Wales with every child.
Splendid. Well, thank you. That was a real tour de force across 5 very different questions. Thank you so much for all your contributions. I'd now like to ask all the candidates to make a closing statement. This time, another 90 seconds, only 90 seconds, but you've done so well with 90 seconds up to now. I'm sure you'll do brilliantly. So, may I start with Mike Baker, please?
Yes, indeed. Having had a lot of experience in this area of law, it is important that those who are dealing with it are au fait with the consequences and the effects it has on those involved. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was the officer dealing with a very, very serious child abuse case. The effect on those children was absolutely shocking. Several of the parents admit to attempted suicide as a result. Now, these children were very naive. They were, I'm not going to blame the parents in this respect, but they were brought up without being told about the dangers of life. Now, this comes back, as everyone here has mentioned, about educating the families about the dangers that children may or may not face. It is important. We need to look strong and hard at the way the police are dealing with all forms of sexual offences, not just the ladies, but the children as well. We need to start training people properly. Thank you.
You have another 20 seconds if you'd like it, Mike.
I'll go make a cup of tea.
Okay. Thank you. And now, Heledd Fychan, would you like to make your closing statement? 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. And as we said, it was a whistle-stop tour of the issues today, but I think it's working that cross-party, you know, this shouldn't be a political issue. Obviously, whoever is in charge politically has an impact, but it is that cross-party working. This is so important that we're having this conversation, but that it doesn't just end up being a conversation. We need to eradicate violence against women. We are not safe at present. The system is not working. I think we also need more women in politics. We need greater diversity in politics, and it's one of the things that we will be campaigning on to ensure that the policies are in place to support women. But I think in terms of the things outlined, I think they would make a real difference, the commitment in our manifesto. And I would urge you, if you'd like to find out more, please get in touch, and I'm happy to take this conversation further and to put you in touch with Nadine Marshall, who I think would be an excellent police and crime commissioner. Thank you.
Also have another 20 seconds if you'd like. No. Okay. Right, so now I'd like to ask Gail John, please, to give you a closing statement.
Yes, certainly. Well, to be honest with you, I personally believe that it's the victims of domestic violence and sexual assault that you are the ones who have the answers to improve the system. That, I mean, I heard, you know, a number of people say that the police commissioner, you know, it's not their responsibility. I mean, I disagree, because if that person is in a prime position to influence policies and to influence national policies across the board, so I believe that that person is in a prime position to listen to the victims of domestic violence and abuse, because how can you change things if those that aren't affected have no reason to change the policies, yet it's the women themselves who are suffering this day in and day out. They are the ones with the solutions. They are the ones who have, you know, who should have the voice in order to change the policies, and they should be able to feel safe to go to a commissioner that is going to listen to them and is willing to embrace their solutions in terms of communication, in terms of everything, all of the questions that you've come up with the rape statistics, and with the gendered response, you know, towards the name shaming and all the problems that we have in society. You know, it's crucial. I believe that we can do it. It's not just sort of scapegoating or putting the problem on someone else. The police and all multi-agencies.
That's it, Gail.
Okay, thank you.
I have given you an extra 10. Thank you all very much. And finally, a closing statement, please, from Alun Michael.
Thank you very much. What I want to do is to take the work in which I've invested heavily to a new level. This is intergenerational problems that we're dealing with, and therefore it has to be an incremental year on year on year on year approach, working with women's organisations, Women 8 and other voluntary organisations, with local authorities, with the health service. The priorities for me are making it a priority for the police, but also a priority within Welsh Government. I work very closely with Jane Hutt as the Minister I relate to most carefully in making sure that our policies and our practice are aligned. It has to be about two things: the support of the victims and the tackling of the perpetrators. Otherwise, as I said earlier, you end up with the perpetrator being a serial perpetrator, and there are more and more victims. We've got to stop that that cycle. I believe very strongly in doing more to prevent the drivers of harm, which are also the drivers of crime, and that's domestic violence and abuse, mental health, substance misuse, and the adverse early experiences of children. If we're going to build safe, confident communities, allow people to grow up safe, we have to create a society in which there's respect. And all of us need to play a part in changing the social attitudes. As I say, it's an incremental job, year on year on year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you to everybody who took part. I must say I found it exhilarating to see democracy in action. Thank you and good night.